I'm Benji Reid, and I call myself a choreo-photolist. And the choreo-photolist is really exploring the intersectionality between photography, choreography, and theatre. The whole aspect was about how do I live in a digital space and find this sense that has a sense of spirituality in this two-dimensional space. My whole work is really about exploring mainly the Black male human condition in the UK and what it means to be a Black man, an older Black man with a decayed body, who is a father, who also has suffered from mental health issues. And my work is a conversation about all of that. It's about fatherhood. It's about strength. It's about fragility. It's about beauty. It's about the ugliness. There's always these double dimensions, two poles within the work. So it might be about defeating gravity. It might be about being weighed down by gravity. It may be the strength when everything else is falling apart. It may be about loneliness. It may be about love. And it's all of these things. But again, I think the easiest way to kind of summarize it is that I'm constantly questioning who I am, what I am, when I wake up in the morning. Yeah, so when I wake up, it's about me then kind of going, how do I then express how I feel about this body, this place, and put that onto the camera, into a two-dimensional space. So my studio is in my house, and it means that I have access to making work 24/7. Something that almost feels kind of documentary-like, because I have so much access. So it means that I don't have to go through any filter systems in order to make work. And this idea of being free of any filters allows me to kind of speak and explore without having to have any gatekeepers to go through, which has been a really beautiful intervention into my work, because I originally came from being a theatre maker. A theatre maker, in order to be a theatre maker, you have to work with this huge machine in terms of whether you're working with your actors, the script writer, the stage manager, the producer, the theatre, then your audience. You know, there's a whole machinery around that. But being this artist that can work within my own studio means that I can cut out all of the middle people. This was a poem written in the light of winter. And I'd made an installation. So I often make installations in my house and then I just leave them up and I see what they do. And I'd been cutting down a number of trees in the summer. And this branch here, even in the summer, was like, oh, this is a keeper, because there's already a drama to it. When I look at that branch, I see resistance. I see something that has resisted, but yet there's a bending. The winter light just hit it in a way that I hadn't seen it before, because I set it up the night before. And then I started to kind of adjust it, taking time to adjust it. And then I stripped the room completely bare. And I just left the chest of drawers. And then I started to add things, and I only added the bowl. How do I insert myself in this scene that allows for this middle space to happen? So you've got the figure, and sometimes I tend to talk about myself in the third person, or as not me, because once I start photographing myself, I become somebody else. What I realize is that what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to make visual poetry. That's really what I'm trying to do. When it all comes down to it, whether the body's moving or whether the body's still, I'm trying to create something that is poetic, that is beautiful, and probably quite unusual. So framing things in the house is really important for me because I'm a reclusive. I don't really go out much. I only go out when I have to go out. And I really enjoy solitude. And this for me was about how do I play with them ideas of home, of solitude. But the figure's looking outside the window. So you've got the figure looking outside, and then you've got this broken branch that seems to be kind of like this thought, this idea of who he was. There's a space for interpretation in between the branch and the character. And I wanted to leave that space in order for the audience to kind of come to their own conclusions of what that meant. This one for me was where the magic happened, because I really wanted to find another space in which I could hold the space. And I lined myself up with the camera and then let the picture be taken. And I didn't realize how accurate it would be, because if you look at where the two hands are and where the branch goes up through my hat and then out through my head, that was one shot where it did the work. This one was after George Floyd had just been murdered. I am beside myself with so much anger. And I didn't know how to comment, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to find a visual representation of where my spirit was. And I'm cleaning out my garden shed. And I come across an old bottle, because I'm been sober now for maybe 10 years, I think, in terms of drinking. So I come across an old bottle. Then I come across an old discarded bed linen. And then as I'm emptying them out, then I come across a canister of petrol. And all three of them was just like, oh, Molotov cocktail. And I was like, yes, I want to make an image that contains fire, because that's exactly where my spirit is. And the Molotov cocktail has so many resonances with insurrection, with fire, with attack, with revolution, with war. And that's where my spirit was. It was in this space of kind of war, with the warrior. I wanted to burn down the institutions, the spaces that could provide a holding space for George Floyd to be murdered. So me and my daughter started to experiment with making a Molotov cocktail. Now I've got a pretty big garden, but I've had to go into a very secluded place in the garden so the neighbors didn't see. Because what we didn't want was for them to see me teaching my daughter how to make a Molotov cocktail. As you can see, with the whole beard thing, it's just not a good place to be. So anyway, we make it. And the next day, we build the studio. And providing that this is my studio in the house and that backdrop is actually made of paper. So all around where that white space is buckets of water, because obviously we don't want the fire to get out of hand, because it's a real flame. And my daughter's 14 years old, and her concentration during this shoot was just immense. She was just, because basically she's having to she's pressing the shutter as I'm midair, or not as I'm midair, but at the setup, she's having to kind of be the camera assistant, because there's so many elements here that have to be contained. So we've got the flame, we've got the fairs, we've got the trainers, and then I've got this carton and I've crushed it. And what it reminded me of was the caricature that they used in Still Nigger with Jay-Z, this almost Sambo-like character. And what I loved about how Jay-Z used it was about using the iconography, but then giving it this other energy. this militant, darker energy. I'm working now with an instinct. This is not a knowing. This is just an instinct. I'm making choices and they feel so right. So once we made the image, I'm kind of sat there and I'm crying and I'm angry, but I feel like I've made something that really speaks to my energy for that time and place. And then I start to cut off his limbs, and then that's when, for me, the piece really started to take another life. That even with this disembodied, dismembered body in space, there's still the intention that can't be stopped. This energy can't be stopped. This character can't be stopped. And what I really loved as well is that if you look at the two hands, you've got one hand that almost feels like it's pleading, and then the other hand is full of intention to burn down. And I love that level of symbolism in the piece.
I actually have a question about this one, and I've been wanting to ask this for ages. Because of the fez, it reminds me of a piece of history. There was a Senegalese French regiment. They were called the Tirailleurs. So they were sharpshooters, and they fought both in the First and Second World War. And part of their uniform was the fez, the red fez. They're very striking images. And after the Second World War, they'd been promised that they would get full citizenship. So they'd get recognition, and that didn't happen. So there was a brief also demonstration by the Tirailleurs, and then they were essentially gunned down, massacred by the French army. And I was wondering if there's something of that in this image of protest as well.
You know, that's really interesting, because the fez has had so many iterations. Because also in North Africa, the fez was also used as a sense of the learned man. That certain people that had worn it were known to be or being thought of as the learned people. But there's had so many different iterations about its meaning. And for me, every time I wear that, I feel connected to something very spiritual. So it's never coming from and that's the thing you will notice with a lot of my work, is that I'm working not from this huge information base of pulling on this and pulling on that. It's that how does that resonate in the space? How does it resonate with me? And then I make the choices of the resonation, and then the intellectualization of something happens.
I just want to ask, a lot of your work is quite dreamlike, like his position is really dreamlike. It's kind of like he's obviously floating in water in a way. Is that something that you do as part of like the story, or is it something that you do as something you just love to see within your art?
I think that's a really interesting question. There's an absolute intention of the dreamlike quality, because generally what happens is that I respond to how I'm feeling and then go straight into the studio. So there's a sense of a surrealness that this is happening in another space, that where this character is occupying is not necessarily Manchester, England, but this universal space. And within this universality, there is a dreamlike quality. So absolutely, there's an intention with it being in an altered space, an alternate space, which people could call dream. This is my attempt at Afrofuturism. This is my daughter in a jet age state. And I love these. I love these things. These are just, they tickle me. They absolutely tickle me, because there's so much fun in how to make this imaginary space where my child can kind of jet off into the future using this can filled with water and spraying it and using it to jet off. Again, about occupying different spaces. Again, it's about dream. It's about that playfulness of escapism. And I love, like with both of the characters, they're operating in this space where they've left one place and not arrived at the other place. And this is the liminality that I feel that embodies all of my work. that I'm constantly departing and not quite there yet. I still feel like I'm reaching as a human being, but also as an artist. I feel like I'm still within these poles. And sometimes I call it intersectionality between kind of choreography, drama, and photography, and which one is kind of kind of leading most. I love the colors on this. I love the fact that there's a plaster on the tubing. For me, it's all about all the tiny little details in this piece that just kind of make it quite special. It was shot in summer. With this one, it's probably one of my favorite pieces because there were so many discoveries. Just giving you a context, behind my head is my living room window. Beyond the rocks is the floor to my living room. That dust is real. So that's everywhere in the house because I've made a holy mess. But I needed to kind of find this space where there was a landscape. So as I'm making this now, it's the first time where I've kind of really started to play with the backdrop and making it a real feature in the landscape of the piece. That these could be distant mountains and there is an horizon. And again, these are all the things that I'm making. These are all the instinctive choices that I'm making because I don't know at the time of making it that that's how it's going to read. But there's an instinct in that I needed to make the floor different from the backdrop. I needed it to have a texture. Sometimes making a work is about listening to the vibration of each of the elements that I bring into the space. And how are they in conversation with each other? So it's like I'm kind of painting. So I'm trying to think of what the vibration of, because what's in the glass is actually tea, but I wanted it to kind of have this redness like wine. And I wanted this character to be anchored, but yet floating, but still held down. And then it was about how do I get all of these elements to kind of sing? And it took me 2 days shooting, going back and refining it, taking stuff away, putting stuff back in, before I found the final composition where this is called Drunken Matters. Rather than Drunken Master, it's called Drunken Matters, because it kind of, for me, it was about that internal struggle with alcohol.
It's really interesting hearing you talking about the work and sort of like the instinctiveness of the work. And I just wondered, because there's so much you can kind of read into each of like the last 3 images. There's so much you could read into, especially in relation to race. Even the first one was the Molotov cocktail, the other hand covered in paint, and then a mouth covered. You know, you've got an image there which speaks on so many levels about suppression, bubbling anger, and then even in the most recent photo, you know, this guy's floating. He's trying to go beyond his sort of realm, but at the same time he's tied down and anchored down. So I wonder how much do you think your personal experiences and frustrations feed into the work? Do you think, is that something that you think about, or do you think that happens totally naturally?
I believe that we walk with our histories into every single space, and some are more prevalent than others, depending on where we are. Absolutely, race comes into it. Why? Because the skin is so obvious, and I'm so obviously black. And that rock there, you know, that has been my oppression. That has been the thing I fought against. So, you know, you make these things and you go, the instinct is to go and get the rocks, and then you have to carry these things into the space. But there is something that you already know that isn't necessarily at the tip of your tongue. I'll make that because that's about oppression. I will do that. It's about this elemental quality. Look at the size of the rope. It's massive. It's massive. It's a big ass rope. So you know, it's doing its job of trying to pull it down, but it's not no itty bitty rope. So everything about it's got a gas mask there. So there's all of these things about protection as well. So absolutely, it's about race. Absolutely, it's about the black body and the fragility and alcohol and surrender and fight. It's all of these things, because all of these are tiny little tropes that I'm now having to kind of work with, because that's the tapestry. So whenever I'm using the black body, of course, I'm speaking about space, because I can't be anything but this man in this time. I set myself a task that I wanted to make wings out of a broken umbrella. That was the task. And then see what that would then kind of spark, what the responses of that would be. And eventually I get to this character that's trying to float out through the window with these mechanical wings. And I love the premise of it. You could call it a dream, you could call it absurd, you could call it surreal. But I love it because it could be so many things. It can be about freedom, but it also can be about oppression. It can be about the beauty of life. It can be about madness. And it's all of them things. And I love it. I love the spiritual intention of this piece, because there's a poetry. And that's what I was kind of trying to seek within it, was where is the poetry in it? And sometimes people go, well, how do you know when the piece is finished? And I go, when the piece is bigger than the small tropes that are in it, when it becomes something else. And yeah, I just love the coloring of it. I love the sense of this man wanting to kind of escape through the window. And again, it's, he's in his home again.
Why did you want to use broken umbrellas?
That's really interesting, because sometimes I wake up and that's the thing that I've woken up with.
Yeah.
I've woken up with, I want to make wings out of broken, and I don't have an idea of why that was the case. That I came to that task. I don't know. It was what I woke up with, so I spent the day making wings. But good question, but I don't know. And this is the beauty, is that half the times I don't really know why I'm making the choices that I'm making. But in the end, when I surrender and I really listen to what I'm doing, I'm going, oh, okay, there is a bigger thing that I was seeking that I didn't see. So I'm not a genius or a mastermind by a long shot. I just know how to listen really well. So there's a couple that I like, but this time we're not going to go into it. So the top one there is I just really love just running into the wall.
So when you're creating and you're in those states and you're feeling those things, do you release your work immediately? Do you ever hold on to your work? And if you have done so, why?
Depending. So what happened is that as soon as I'd make it, I'd be so happy that I wanted to share it straight away. And then what would happen is I'd get gutted because I see all the mistakes. But now it's got like 500 likes and I'm like, dope! If I take it down now, I've lost me 500 likes. So there was a thing that I had to start thinking about the longevity of a piece and where and how I was sharing and why I was sharing. So there's times like now where I hold back on work because I know that there's another level of refinement that the work needs to go to. So you make your first pass, you make your second, your third, your fourth, your fifth, your sixth, your seventh, your eighth, and then you get to a point where you go, okay, it's complete. But I feel the longer I wait, the more the piece has a chance to marinate, and it's about my relationship with the work rather than the world's relationship and my relationship with their response.
I feel like in a lot of your work and from what you've said, there's kind of like this cartoon childlike aspect to it as well, in the sense that it's because you keep saying about exploring your vulnerability by surrendering. I feel like that's what a lot of children do naturally. And do you think that you've kind of let go of what you were in before just to come back to that, and maybe like your daughter included with it as well, is like influenced your work?
Yeah, I think when you really listen to yourself, then you know, and especially as a creative, that the child is absolutely very present. I think that there's a wonderment that we still carry as our inner child, that is full of play and an inquisitiveness. And if there is a childlike quality that I connect to, it is about being inquisitive, being really open and surprised. Not necessarily the vulnerability, but just that wonderment. And I love when my mind moves from the logical to the playful. So this was the first time when I'd really got to explore my inner darkness in a way that was poetic. And this spoke to everything about where I was, this guy in this barren land, sat on rocks, this kind of astronaut with wings growing out of his back. Just for me was just like, there is still hope there because there is wings, but he hasn't got off the ground yet. But he's in that space of stillness and meditation. And for me, it's just like, when I look at that, I remember where I was when I was making that. But there was a time when I wasn't making work and I was feeling like that. And that's when it felt like death, because there wasn't an outlet. By the time I'm here, there is an outlet. So now this is about remembering, reenacting, but still feeling that truth. This is MF Doom, and I wanted to do a homage to MF Doom, the artist. MF Doom is a character. He was a rapper in KMD in the mid-90s. Then his brother Sub Rock died. KMD kind of disappeared into obscurity. MF Doom emerges 1999 as this character called MF Doom, but he's masked. So we don't know who he is, but his flows is like, he described himself as a rather ugly guy whose flows are gorgeous. That's how he describes himself. MF Doom, please, 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 if there's anything you take from this, you have to go and check some MF Doom. This guy had a profound effect on me because his whole story was about reinvention. He was great. He had this thing in the 90s. His brother dies. He disappears. He comes back, but he's masked. So he's like one of the nicest MCs without a chain. But his whole thing was that it isn't about how I look. It's nothing to do with how I look. It's to do with my voice and the music. And he's got his first album is called Operation Doomsday. Please go check it. And then the next album is Mad Villainy. You need to go and check it. So I wanted to do this homage to him, and I needed to find a way in which I could kind of pictorially represent this most dope artist. So I approached a guy called Liam Hopkins, who makes these sculptures that are geometrical sculptures. So he makes dogs and all sorts of animals that are made up by these hundreds of triangles. So I asked him if he could make me a body warmer and trousers in this geometrical shape, because I kind of wanted to give it that kind of b-boy, next level, dope shit. And, you know, that's what a lot of MC, you know, when us of the hip hop culture, you know, we're like trying to do that next level thing that most average cats aren't trying to do. And the idea was that I wanted him to be, I always had this idea of this character being impaled by a boombox. That's always been an image that I've always wanted to make. And you'll see how it kind of develops. So this is, so basically I made it into a comic strip. So this would be like Doom, like thinking about being Doom, but he's got a crown over his head. And we see him contemplating. And as you can see, the hat is geometrical as well. He's still in thought. Then Doom is on the way, But where's he going? We don't know. Boom. You can see by looking in his eyes, he's on a mission. Boom. Doom sees it. Ta-da! He starts to call the box to him. Has the box. Obviously, presses play. This is his own music. He obviously likes what he hears. And then, pow, shoo, bam, shoo, bam. Music's so amazing. Pow. Oh, the idea, pow. Now he's impaled by the box. A blast of energy comes out the back. Pow. He's taken to another place. Finished. And that's just Doom. And that was my celebration of him.